Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Angus,
And my name is Dan.
and it's episode three time. We will sort of be grinning at each other because we hit stop on preview pod 2 like 2 minutes ago, so we are straight back into it. So I'm not going to ask Dan how he is, and it's not because I'm being rude. It's because you've just heard how he is on episode 2. Um, so we're going to jump right in again, just to timestamp it in case anything happens, because this one is likely to not go out until Monday evening. Um, it is 11 on Sunday night. So if anything happens that changes anything we've said here, bear that in mind. So without further ado, we'll jump into the teams. First one of these is Wrexham, the other sort of promoted team, the other sort of team that there's been a lot of sort of fanfare around. That's clearly like trying to do some big business. Um, we didn't manage to get someone to provide us with the information for this, so we are sort of going to try and, I guess, sort of muddle through, give you some of the information as we sort of see it, as we have found it, as much as we can. So Dan, I know you had sort of a predicted lineup from someone. I don't know if you want to sort of just give us that as a starting point, and we can sort of start talk about some of the conversations, some of the incomings, etc., off the back of that.
Yeah, so this is like a screenshot I got from one of the Wrexham pods, Rob Bryan Red. Um, there are like a what if, especially to the couple of players up front. But I think, well, they'll know more the team more than me. But from what I gather, this is probably pretty accurate to what we're gonna see. Is Wrexham? They could sign two or three more players. Um, but yeah, Ockham, well, up front. I bet he wishes he was playing up front. In goal, highly rated youngster, was at Arsenal. Um, they do obviously have Danny Ward, but I think he's going to be back up. They'll play a back three of Clemworth, new signing Connor Cody in the middle of the back three, and Brunt on the left. Longman, right wing back. Um, James and O'Brien. O'Brien, obviously, a new signing. Um, he won't be a stranger to anyone in this division. Um, Angus did just tell me how to pronounce this name at left wing back. Go on, Angus. Tell me.
Kanche.
Yeah, that wasn't what I said. Um, Windass, another new signing in the 10, and they have put Kiefer Moore and Broadhead up front, but they've not officially signed those. But with Wrexham, they have obviously got. They brought in Hardy in the summer. They brought Sam Smith, another striker, in January, so they're not short on strikers. But after a fairly slow start to the window, Angus, they're now really starting to pick up over the last couple of weeks, especially with the Windass, O'Brien, and Cody signings, getting a good spine. It sounds like Kiefer Moore is pretty close to being done as well. So yeah, as expected, they normally go for experienced players for the level they've had or above. Um, I'm guessing the first thing is, anyone jump out at you, Angus? Has any been in your draft?
None have been in my draft. I think, anyone who's listened for any length of time will expect me to mention both Josh Windass and Ryan Hardy, as two players I am a fan of, and two players that I think could do well, particularly as they build out the quality of this team. So I think those are the obvious places to start for me. It is where they've sort of added quality from the division. Windass they've managed to pick up on a free. I'd imagine they're paying him significant wages, given that Rangers were sort of very much in for him, and I believe the reporting was that Coventry and Norwich both made late runs to try and sign him. Ryan Hardy, we've obviously seen do well in the division for Plymouth, so I'd expect him to do well. Cody, I think, is a smart addition, um, but I think I'll wait and see how some of these do. Those are sort of two that are on the radar, but I'm not necessarily going to start with. Um, Potentially someone like a Okonkwo in terms of the 4.5 keepers, just in terms of looking ahead, any sort of concerns there. But um, that's where I'm looking. Anyone that sort of jumps out to you with Wrexham, Dan?
Yeah, I think a Conqueror in goal, obviously pretty cheap, 4.5. Um, Interesting that Longman has been priced as a defender. So I think he's 5 million, but if they are good defensively, he could do well. They've um, obviously Parkinson in charge, and he does normally make Wrexham pretty solid, or he did do in League One. They sort of stay solid, and then they sort of rely on normally two or three of their attacking players that are top end of the level they're in to go and win it for them. Which, if they get Kiefer Moore, they've already got Hardy, Broadhead, Windass. That's enough firepower to win your games at Championship level. So yeah, I'm still not 100% sure how Wrexham will do. At some point, they are going to hit a wall. Um, I'm not sure their squad's as eye catching as Birmingham, who we did on the second pod, but I do think, especially over the last couple of weeks with the signing that they're making, they're now pushing towards mid-table. I would say. I don't know how you feel with the prediction.
Yeah, my view is sort of I view it as a consolidation season for them. Whether they see it that way or not, we'll see. But I think, or they don't necessarily have to see it that way. But I think it will end up being a consolidation season for them, which I think is fine, really. I expect to see them at the moment, pending some other additions, lower mid-table. Um, and so that would be my prediction for them. And we'll see sort of what else they do. But even accounting for a couple of those additions, I just think there's quite a few teams out there that I'm expecting to be strong as well. And so it's just sort of like not solely to be harsh on them. I just think, there's a lot of competition there. And I don't think actually a year where they consolidate themselves in the championship is necessarily the worst thing. I think feeding into that additionally is just sort of the fact they've had a slow start in the window. And so it might impact in terms of how much they hit the ground running to start the season as they bring some of these players in. But ultimately, I'm predicting them to be sort of clear of the relegation, which, to be honest, sort of with any promoted side, is still the first sort of benchmark, and then you go from there.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But yeah, hopefully that's been useful on Wrexham. Obviously, we've sort of tried to give a little bit of an overview, but they also feel like one of the most teams that's most still a work in progress. And even sort of the team we've given you there, neither of the strikers are actually at the club yet. So it sort of paints a picture there. So next, we're going to go to Hull. Obviously, narrowly survived last season. Um, I asked Danny McDonald for this. Now, bear in mind, in terms of any changes, Danny sent me this on Monday. So I'm not sure whether anything has changed, but just if you listen to this and something has changed, that's why. Um, so he said the key outgoings: Jones, McLaughlin, Pedro, Gelhart at the end of his loan, Alzate. I can't remember whether it's been like Danny says it said on Monday it was due to be announced that he was moving to MLS. I'm not sure whether it's been announced that he's moving to MLS, but um, that's sort of there. He said they've managed to clear out a lot of the dead wood as well. Also worth noting that due to the fee restrictions, there's a legal dispute about Puerta and Lalawi's registration. Puerta was an obligation to buy, who they obviously had last season, but technically that was official as of the 1st of July, and they received the restriction the day before. So at the moment, the concern is that Puerta won't be allowed to play along with Lalawi because of the sort the embargo they are currently under. For key incomings, he said this could look as out of date as apparently there's 4 signings imminent, hinging on EFL approval. Currently, they've signed Ajayi and Semi Ajayi and Dylan Phillips as a backup goalkeeper. He said they've been getting creative in how they can get players. It looks like they're signing Famewo from Sheffield Wednesday, so that has happened. John Lundstrom, that has also happened. Enis Destan, I think that's also happened as a young Turkish striker, and David Akintola, who's a winger from the Turkish league. He said he's expecting more in, especially a striker. They've been linked with McBurney and Freegan from Westerlo. Also, incidentally, that's 2 more mentions of Ollie McBurney than I expected us to have. But he said the likely lineup of formation, he's put 4-2-3-1. He's put Pandor in goal, Drame, Egan, Hughes, Giles, uh, Lundstrom and Slater sort of behind Crooks, uh, Amara and Kintola either side of Joseph. And he said that he has said note that this will very likely change and will also have Miller and Balumi in it soon. Miller due back after the first international break, with Balumi a couple of weeks later. In terms of the assets, he said best asset any of the defence. He's pointed out, and we've sort of had a conversation about the whole defence. Pointed out his 8th best defence last season and 4th best since Walter left. Budget asset, any of the defence. Note that we now play with attacking fullbacks. So Drame and Giles could get a few assists. Got 3 between them in 3 games in pre-season so far. Under the radar, some of those players mentioned above. His finishing prediction, he's given 18th. He said the new manager has given the fan base a lot of encouragement just through his interviews, demeanour, etc. Players clearly love him. He seems switched on tactically, and we've got a solid enough starting 11, particularly once Miller, Matazo, and Balumi are back to outperform what's currently predicted of us. I think that's the key with Hull, beyond sort of like they are adding, is there's a little bit of what the team is at the start of the season and what it will be come sort of a couple of months into the season. You know, we talked last season. I mean, I owned Balumi when he came into the team. He was great and then got injured. Liam Miller, we talked about for 2, 3 years now. He's done well, was doing well last season, got injured. Matazo was looking interesting to some people. He got injured. So those players will obviously make a difference, but I do think some of those additions, there's some extra solidity that's been brought there. You know, Amewo, we've seen do well. John Lundstrom, solid player at this point. Like Femi Ajayi, another one. I think there's just a little bit more solidity there. But any thoughts on that, Dan? Any sort of Hull players making their way in for you?
I'm not sure about making my way in. I do agree. I think when the news was breaking that they might have restrictions on signings and things like that, and they have lost a few players. But if you do look at the goalie and that back four, it is pretty strong. We've seen Drame and Giles be very good at times in the championship. Good experience with Ajayi and Egan, Famewu as cover, Coyle as cover, Hughes as well in there. So they do have options, and if they do build defensively and they are solid, which he was what they were fairly solid. Like they weren't getting hammering towards the end of the season. And you do throw in a Kamara who at times looked good. Crooks can get the odd goal. Palmer. I do think striker is a massive problem. Joseph and a couple of the young players they've signed up there, they need to hopefully bring in someone. I'm not sure if they will end up with McBurney. If they do, he's been competent at this level. He's a handful on his day. So, whereas probably 2 weeks ago I'd have laughed at his 18th prediction. I do think they're not like destined to go down like a Sheffield Wednesday. I do think they're going to be fairly competitive. So I have briefly thought of Panda because he is 4.5. I think he could be a good option. And if they are solid and Giles is attacking 5 million, I'm sure he'll be in my team at some point throughout the year.
Yeah, I've got Panda as one of my 4.5s,
Yeah.
and he will probably sort of stay. Everyone knows how I've felt about Ryan Giles for years now, and yeah, I'm sure at some point he will be making his way into my team. Whether that's from the outset, we'll see. But he probably won't be far away if he doesn't make it in early doors, particularly if there is that defensive solidity about them. So it's gonna be interesting. And as we sort of said, some of those players to come back, I think will make it more interesting. But yeah, not necessarily a disaster. And with the fact they're adding bodies in, which was one of the real concerns for me, I think it is improving a little bit. Um, the next team we're going to talk about is Oxford. As some will have noted, that was the other team we did not have any sort of feedback for on Twitter, so we're going to again attempt to fill in some of these gaps ourselves. So, in terms of the sort of team, this will help fill in a few of the sort of incomings, etc. Jamie Cumming will be in goal again. Brody Spencer, who they brought in, looks like he's going to play at right back. It looks like it's Long or more at centre back, along with Hellick, and then Gregley at left back. Brannigan playing in midfield along with De Kirschmacher, who's I think their new record signing. So you'd obviously expect him to play. I think uh, Stanley Mills played quite a lot in attack in pre-season, so he could be one to watch in that regard. Matt Phillips played behind the striker. Goodrum has played out wide. Dembele has played out wide. Placheta hasn't been involved much yet, so he might be a little bit more behind. Mark Harris and Tom Bradshaw have split time up top. They have just signed a Slovenian striker, so you'd expect that he's going to be involved. And they have brought in Luke Harris on loan from Fulham, who's sort of highly rated as an attacking midfielder. So you'd expect him to come and play the 10 more often than not in that 4-2-3-1 system. Dan, any sort of initial thoughts on how that lineup might look, or anything else around Oxford?
I'm a little bit worried about Oxford. I think they done excellent last year, especially towards the end under Rowett, relying heavily on set pieces and a strong defence. I just wonder if that's not going to be quite enough. Can you keep relying on Hellick to score nearly double figures for you? I'm not sure that's the most reliable way. I do think Cumming is a good option. He done very well last year and will tick along. Greg Lee at times was good, 4.5 defender. I know Spencer, you mentioned on the right side, he was highly rated at Huddersfield and got his move. So maybe he'll be a bit more attacking. Brannigan was in and out, had a couple of injuries, but he's on penalties. So is it too high? 6 million for an Oxford player? It could be. And as you mentioned, if someone like a Mills at 5 million, if he gets in, maybe a fifth choice midfielder could be really nice. So I think we will have Oxford players in our teams. You know, they might get a double or something, or be good cover on the bench. But yeah, I'm a little bit worried about Oxford this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'd expect to see them towards the lower end. I think Rowett has done a good job with them. They've made a few additions. I think they're not necessarily where they need to be. I do like some of these players like Luke Harris, that could potentially bring them a little bit more sort of creativity on a regular basis. Um, but it remains to be seen. You know, you would look at them as one of the more likely teams to be down the bottom, so they probably need a bit more addition. But as you say, I think there will come times where we had them last year in terms of people had Harris, people had Goodrum, Plachetta, like Greg Lee. There will like Hellick. There will be times where like Cumming, who was one of these that did incredibly on Jeepers Keepers. Um, so that's something to bear in mind for people as well. Not the worst start for them, not the best either, but in terms of the home game against Portsmouth and then away at Hull. So if you are looking at something from them defensive, particularly in a rotation, another potential option. You know, I talked about someone like Cresswell before, Greg Lee, who was in, I think, my first draft, is another one that could sort of slot in there as sort of, your early cover, sort of sits on the bench as a playing defender sort of thing. Him and Spencer like could fill that sort of role. So, um, they're the most likely I think you'd start with, or maybe sort of coming in goal. Um, Anyone that's in your draft or anyone you're looking at, Dan?
I think, like yourself, Lee might actually be in my draft. Yeah, he is. When I done my draft, a lot of it was on price points, and he was 4.5. So I'm not saying he's going to stay in, but he's definitely someone who I have debated about starting with.
Makes sense, really. So I think that's it really on Oxford. Like a little bit of caution, but I think there are some players there that are potentially interesting, which I think is sort of useful, really. I think even for the sort of lower end teams, that's all you're really asking for. Um, so I'll move on to the next one, which is Norwich. Um, FPL Frog. Ian has given us the info for this. This was sort of early in the week as well. So if anything has changed, that is why. But he said the key outgoings are Borja Sainz, Angus Gunn, and Onel Hernandez. Key incomings, Matthias Quistgarden, Jeffrey Schlupp, Jakub Medic, Harry Darling, Jacob Wright, Vladan Kovacevic, Papa Diallo, and Dan Grimshaw. He said with the likely lineup, it's very hard to know at this point who will start the friendly against NAC Breda on Saturday. Will tell us a lot more. And he says I think it will be a 4-3-3. Can't rule out five at the back. I'm just going to scroll down because he sent me an update after that friendly. Um, so he thinks Kovacevic, and he has given percentage chances of these to be the starters. So Kovacevic 99%, Stacey, we talked about the right back position in the last one. Stacey 80%, Medic 99%, Darling 99%, Christine 80%, Nunez 99%, Wright 99%, Forson 60%, Diallo 60%, Sargent 99%, Cernak 90%. He has then said, in terms of the best assets, Josh Sargent, saying if he stays, he probably is the best pound for pound striker in the league. He suspects he might be here at the start of August, but not at the end. He said Harry Darling at 5 is the only defender he'd pick. Wouldn't pick any of the midfielders given Wright and Nunez don't produce much in attack. Best value besides Darling, if Stacey can get established himself at right back / wing back, he could be a steal at 5. However, his crossing needs to massively improve. Worth saying either Cernak at 7.5 or Chris Garden at 8 could prove value if Sargent leaves and one of them establish themselves as the first choice centre forward. Under the radar, if Lucien Mahovo can get in at left back as he did before he got injured last season, he could be an excellent 4.5 option. Amankwa Forson showed glimpses last season but suffered with injury. As a 5.5 mid, he could be a bargain if he can force his way into the side. As for the prediction, a lot of their Twitter fans / clickbait content creators think we've quote won the transfer window, but almost all of our signings for money have no championship experience. He thinks they'll finish anywhere between 6th and 12th, so he said let's say 9th, which I think is fair. Any initial thoughts on sort of Norwich or anything there, Dan?
Yeah, I think with Norwich over the last couple of years, that the main thing is Josh Sargent. I thought he'd be gone by now, but he's still going to be here. I still think he goes as Frog did before the window closes. So you've got Sternak or Chris Dargan, 8 and 7, as he said, could be decent prices. I've always got a soft spot for Stacey. Obviously, was part of the Luton side that won back-to-back promotions. At 5, if he's attacking and he becomes regular, that'll be another option. Like I said, I've not thought too much about Norwich, but the fixtures are fairly decent. Millwall to start, Portsmouth, although it is away, Middlesbrough, who look probably a decent time to play him before the window closes, and then Blackburn away. So not terrible, although like there might just be too many question marks at the minute, unless you go for a defender. Darling, we know, good from set pieces, so he's probably the safest. But I haven't had any in the draft because, like I said, I thought Sargent was leaving, so there's no point planning for him. Any major draft, Angus?
None have made my draft. As you say, Sargent, there's that element. I think there's also sort of Chris Garden and Cerner in terms of one of them potentially being an option. But nothing really has sort of grabbed me sort of in terms of Norwich to start the season. I also think their start isn't that great. And I know they're playing Millwall at home rather than Millwall away, which is always handy. But having to play Millwall, then going away to Portsmouth, then play Middlesbrough, like that's not a great start for Norwich. So I think that's part of it for me. If someone like Sargent is still there, he's obviously sort of like he could return against anyone. Like he might find his way in. Otherwise, like it's a little bit of I guess a wait and see for me. So nothing from them at the moment. But I think that's everything on Norwich really. Um, Sort of a little bit of a wait and see, but I think a couple of options in there. Um, we could spend a long time on the next team or a relatively short time, depending on what exactly you're talking about. But I'll hand over to Dan for Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, first thing to say, I think, yeah, for the fans, it's a nightmare. Obviously, Luton have gone through it. We got relegated 3 years in a row, numerous point deductions and things like that. I wouldn't wish it on any club, uh, especially the fans of the clubs. But I did get the information for Bez FPL, so thank you very much. Um, and he did just do an update yesterday, which was very helpful. Um, they've not made any new signings, although um, they did manage to sign Barry Bannon. He has signed a new deal. Um, Loads of players have left, and more will come because some players have handed in their notice because their wages haven't been paid again. Roll has left. News manager Heinrich Pedersen stepping up from assistant manager. Um, so I'm gonna just read out the starting 11. Um, Charles in goal. Valerie Iorfa Otengbayo, or he'll start unless Bernard is fit. Palmer at left back, youngster Fuser with Bannon, and then it's got McNeil, Ingleson, Lowe, and Ugbo. So it's basically any of their pros are basically starting with a few of their youngsters. Um, he's then said that there's no fantasy assets worth considering at the minute, and you should probably be targeting them, which I think that's fair. Although that lineup does have pros in, it's not ideal. They're playing Leicester, and they're having to cancel friendlies and things like that. But yeah, I think getting Bannon to sign was a major difference. But yeah, they could lose more players before the window closes. Well, or even by the time of the game, the players might refuse to play. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's worth asking if you've had any Sheffield Wednesday in your team, Angus. I haven't, if I'm being honest.
I have not. There's a couple in terms of squad balance that they potentially provide there, in terms of there's potentially a 4.0 defender there as well. So that potentially changes things, but no, they have not found their way into my draft so far. If anything, and I say this in the nicest possible way, um, I have been looking at how I get particularly Leicester players into my team ahead of game week 1.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But yeah, I just want to say good luck to Sheffield Wednesday. Hopefully, Chanziri leaves the club, and that's the most important thing at the minute. You just need him out the club. Um, I'm not sure it's worth talking about Sheffield Wednesday. I feel bad talking about them, really.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of wish the fans luck. There's only so much I wish sort of Chancery luck, but I wish the
Yeah,
fans luck. Unfortunately, my hopes are not high for Sheffield Wednesday going into the season. Like bringing someone like Bannon back does help, but I think there's a real problem there at the moment, that I think is going to have a real impact this season. And so, particularly from a Gaffer point of view, I think it is sort of there's only so much to say about Sheffield Wednesday at this point. So I think we'll move on that cheery note to West Brom, which feels like a hell of a transition. Thank you to Gemma, who sort of did this for us. So in terms of the key incomings, there was Nat Phillips, obviously coming in from Liverpool. Um, Experience, particularly at this level. Out Hegebo from Bran, who she describes as a physical target man up front, and George Campbell from Montreal, another defensive signing to bolster the squad depth. Um, Key outgoings, there's been quite a lot of departures, but she said Ajayi, Diangana, and Swift are the main ones, um, who were released as part of a major clear out. So the likely lineup, it's predominantly been a 4-2-3-1 under Mason. And she said probable lineup: Griffiths in goal, Furlong, Phillips, Hegham, and Campbell at the back, Mowat and Malumbi in midfield, Fellows, Price, and Grant behind Hegabo. She sent this yesterday, and she said Hegabo led the line today with and said Malumbi, Grant, and Price were also impressive in the final preseason friendly against Rio. In terms of the fantasy asset, she said the best pick is Hegabo. First choice striker, strong debut, suggests he'll deliver goals, and said he was exciting to watch yesterday. Mid tier, she sort of said Isaac Price, energetic box to box midfielder, scored in a friendly, looks nailed on, and said budget gem could be Josh Griffiths. It's been confirmed as the starting keeper. Could be valuable for clean sheets given his pricing tier at the position, which I think is fair. The season prediction, she said sixth to eighth, with Phillips adding defensive stability and Hegabo bringing goal threat. The spine is stronger. Lots of experienced players like Ajayi, Diangana, and Swift is a challenge, but Mason's restructured squad looks capable of mounting a push. Um, I'd say it worked on me. So when I was talking about sort of changing the team, um, I might as well say by the end of that, I had a couple of West Brom in my team. So I have Furlong and Hegabo. I think there's arguments for a number of players in that team. And you mentioned Griffiths, Furlong, one of the other defenders at 5.5. You've got um, Fellows, Price, Grant, Hegabo. I think there's quite a few there. And when you think there's players to come into that team, even with some of those departures like sort of Mikey Johnston and things like that, there's Josh Madger. There's some players there, but is there anyone in your sort of squad at the moment, Dan, or anyone on your mind from West Brom?
Um, Off camera yesterday, we were briefly talking about West Brom. They're just one of these teams that have passed me by. They've done a bit of business, but not too much. And I hadn't checked the fixtures, and when I did, I thought I might need a little bit of West Brom. Blackburn at home, Wrexham away, Portsmouth at home, Stoke away, Derby at home, Middlesbrough away. So probably for 6 game weeks, it's a pretty decent fixtures. I saw them tear Luton apart on the last day. That was mainly Fellows. Obviously, he's had a price rise. He's now 8.5. You do run the risk with the transfer window still being open. I think for the last couple of windows, he's been linked to a Premier League club. I do think Hegebo's, we've mentioned a few over the last few pods about the bracket between 8 and 6.5, and Hegebo sticks in that nicely at 7.5. Furlong will be 6 million until the end of time. He always feels like a fairly boring pick, and then you realise he's in like the top 10 defenders for the season, and you realise that's why he's 6 million every year. So yeah, I think there's a chance when I do the redraft closer to the deadline that one, maybe two, West Brom might actually make it in the draft, which I'm not sure I'd have said that before we started recording the pods a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the interesting thing there. I think there's cases you can make throughout. You know, whichever one of sort of Campbell and Hegham might play left back. There's interesting. We saw Hegham be a useful pick when he played left back earlier last season. Um, there's Fellows there who obviously high quality. Grant being a midfielder at 7.5 is potentially interesting. Price 5.5 could be very interesting there. Hegabo. Like, I think there's a lot to like there. Um, if you are going higher end, someone like Griffiths, um, in terms of goalkeeper. But yeah, I think the more I've looked at it, the more, I mean, it didn't take long for me to get sort of West Brom coverage in there. Um, and obviously there's lots of options around, but I do think there are a few options there to throw into the mix as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, and I do think that they could. I see them as part of that group of teams that could challenge for the back end of the playoffs. I see four or five sort of stronger looking teams, in my opinion, and then a number of teams that could sort of be competing at the back end, and it just depends how it goes. And I'd probably put West Brom in that group at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's everything on West Brom. So I think I'm coming to you on Sheffield United.
Yeah, so thank you, Tomo, for Sheffield United's information. Um, so we got Keane Cummins. He said we've brought in a few young players from the Bulgarian league, although he expects them more as development players. Um, Bindon, the centre back, who had an excellent season at Reading, was signed by Forest, but has now been loaned back out. So he's a centre back. They signed Louis Barry on loan. Um, was excellent for Stockport. Unfortunately, got injured at Hull, so we never really saw um, how we would do. But he thinks with Louis Barry coming in, we might actually see Hamer more centrally, which he done a job out wide left, but it could be good for that. Outgoings, obviously Souza, one of the best defensive midfielders last year, although they do have our blaster expected to come back in September time, so he might fill the gap. They obviously lost some loans, Raksaki, Brereton Diaz, Gilchrist, Suter, Chowdhury, so they've lost a fair few players going back on loan. They've got Sellis is new. He says he's likely going to play a 4-3-3, high pressing, high energy. He hasn't really given a lineup, but he said Cooper is a decent option, although expensive, as probably the best goalkeeper in the league, which I think that's fair to say. He said keep an eye on Sariki at right back. I think we saw at the end of last season he done well, was very attacking. So I think he's a bit cheaper than a lot of the other defenders. So could be a decent option. Burrows at left back, excellent first season in the Championship. Was very attacking. Might still be on penalties, which we saw last year. 7 million has got that bump up. He said, what he said? He said he likes the look of Brooks. He looks sharp, and as at 6 million, we saw flashes of him last year. He's not entirely sure he's going to start. He said he still thinks Tyrese Campbell will play up front, but he thinks Cannon has settled now and could do well if given a run in the side. So yeah, Angus, it's a bit tricky because he hasn't done a proper lineup, but they were very good last year. We had Burrows a lot. Obviously, Cooper was priced at Plymouth and then got the move, so he was in a lot of teams. Have you got any Sheffield United, Angus?
So I've got Burrows. Obviously, I had
Yeah, I have.
Sariki at the end of last season, and I do think that he's interesting. But um, there's options throughout there. I think it's interesting what he says about Campbell starting up top initially. But yeah, Burrows was the main one for me. He went in sort of right away. I'd be very surprised if I start the season without him. At the moment, I don't necessarily see myself starting with any of the others, but I think, it's part because I'm not going to go that high with Cooper. I mean, I know I advocated last season with Trafford, where I sort of said, sort of went with him and just sort of went that way in terms of just like set and forget, like get a keeper from like best performing defense, like just have them sit there. And so I do understand the logic with him. You've got Hamer, you've got O'Hare, like there are options throughout. Um, I'd initially I'm just looking at Burrows, but particularly Hamer at the top end, midfield wise, O'Hare slightly more affordable. You know, Brooks was one that we mentioned a couple of times last season, but I think Campbell will be the other one that I'll probably have an eye on. But I don't know if there's anyone else that you've sort of either got in or had a look at.
Not really. Similar to you, Burrows went straight in the team. Will probably stay. Always got an eye on Hamer. I think he is probably one of the best players in the league. Could argue that if he didn't go off in the playoff final, they probably win it. So yeah, I think Sheffield United will definitely be on the radar throughout the season. Just maybe got to see how it settles down a bit. Um, Bristol City at home, Swansea away, Millwall at home, Middlesbrough away. It's not the worst set of fixtures. So yeah, if we get maybe a bit more clarity over maybe a Brooks starting at 6 million, might be worth the punt. But yeah, it's Burrows, and I think that'll be it to start with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll sort of see how it goes on that one. But yeah, they're certainly interesting, and I certainly expect them to be right up there. Um, Maybe not for sort of the top spot or top two. We'll see how it goes, but sort of similar to where they were last season in terms of top end of the playoff finishers. So I think that brings us to the last team of the of the preview pods. Um, I think some of these have gone through a little bit quicker, but I think there's also an element of like there's certain guys you do or don't want us to focus on, and we can certainly do that, and it certainly adjusts accordingly. So the last one, as hopefully you will all have noticed, thinking about who we haven't talked about yet, is Leicester. Now, I think Leicester actually uh, probably became a little bit clearer in the friendly they played today, but I'll run through the information that FPL Fox provided me on Thursday, which I think some of it has probably become a little bit clearer in the friendly they played today. But it's in terms of key outgoings, with the exception of Vardy, sort of Ward, Everson. No further moves have happened yet. Rumours for Hermansen. I mean, Cody, he said, which has obviously happened now, and Didi, which sounds like it's progressing sort of relatively quickly. I think they've agreed a fee with the Turkish side, and there's other interest from around Europe, so he will be on his way. And there's also interest in El Canous are all picking up pace. Um, in terms of the key incomings, Begovic, the only signing made so far, needing to sell before they can buy. There will be interest in a central midfielder and a striker. One other incoming is, of course, the Cifuentes appointment. In terms of the best assets, he has said Fatawu and Mavadidi are standouts. Their 23-24 seasons evidence this. Fatawu not fully fit yet, just as a flag. Jordan Ayew, who's an 8.5 mid, and Daka, who's an 8 million forward, currently competing for the number 9 spot. El Canous at 8.5 is potentially a game breaker, but a move away he thinks is likely. In terms of budget options, he said Nelson's potential route into the defence. Pressed on loan at Oxford, Stolarczyk, who's a 5.5 goalkeeper. He says is very likely to be the number one for the season. which I think is obviously sort of predicated on that Hermansen move. Under the radar, he said Jeremy Monga, the 16-year-old who is a 6 million midfielder. Very good chance he starts the season with the El Kanoush transfer rumours and Fatawu still building at fitness. He said he's been our best player in pre-season so far. In terms of the predicted game week one lineup, he said it's very much transfer dependent. He predicted Stolarczyk to start in goal. I will note Hermansen started the friendly today, but obviously with what he says about like the likelihood of a move away, it's difficult to say on that one. He's put James Justin at right back, Fass and Nelson at centre back, and Thomas at left back. Um, Winks in midfield with he put Ndidi and Skip at 50-50, which I think, as he says, depends on whether Ndidi is there. I think it seems more likely it'll be Skip at this point. Fatawu or McAteer 50-50. Fatawu's minutes have obviously been heavily managed, but I think he got sort of 55 minutes today, so I guess that leans towards him sort of having built enough minutes up. He said El Kanous or Monga 50-50 as a 10. Um, I think El Kanous started today. So I think if he is here, he'll probably start. And Mavididi on the left, and then you put Daka or Ayew as a 50-50 up front. Jordan Ayew started today and I think scored. Akoli started at centre back rather than Nelson as well. I think that's sort of the relevant sort of changes to that. Um, but yeah, so I think it's interesting there. Um, I think there's certainly a number of things to look at with Leicester. Um, I'm just looking because I'm sure there was a another comment. Oh yeah, in terms of the prediction, he said fifth, as he's expecting a points deduction to come their way. So he's just knocked the predicted finish down a little bit. Um, and yeah, it was Vestergaard and Okoli that started at centre back today. Um, he did also say it'll be Ricardo and Justin fullbacks most likely if Ricardo plays the last friendly, which he did not. So I think that sort of sums up that Justin might play at right back, but at least to start off with, it looks like it will be Luke Thomas at left back. Um, Sumare played in midfield today, but I think you'd expect Winks to start there. Um, so any initial thoughts on any of that from Leicester, Dan?
Yeah, I think with them playing Sheffield Wednesday, everyone wants to know like which 2 or 3 to get, and I don't know. It just seems a lot of question marks, especially in defence. Which you mentioned Justin, and you've Chowdhury started. Centre backs have changed again. I do wonder though if that's going to be the front four. Fatu, El Kanous, Mavididi, and Ayew. Obviously, we've mentioned Kanous could go. Jordan Ayew up front could be interesting, especially with that Sheffield Wednesday. It might be worth a punt on them. We saw what Fatwa and Mavididi did in a couple of years ago. So, yeah, I think I might have to go double attack, which seems a bit risky, but it feels like it could be the upside play if you get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was obviously very big on Fatawu 2 years ago. Mavididi has shown what he can do, so I think both them are options. El Kanous, who was in my first draft, then obviously all the talk about him leaving sort of made me move elsewhere. If there's any likelihood he's going to be around even for the first couple of games, he might well come back into my team. Ayew playing up front looks like he's going to start there, so I think there's a number of options there. Defensively, best bet probably looks like Luke Thomas to start with at this point, which says a lot. Um, but it does sort of very much depend on the transfers and fitness at this point of multiple players. So I think it's tough to say either way with them. But I think sort of those attacking areas feel like the real sort of focus, particularly with some of those early fixtures. So I think it just depends how you can exactly get into that, how much you want to commit. Obviously, with sort of potential transfers, minutes having been managed, options in those positions, like what exactly you want to do is up to you. But I think to me, it feels like that's really where you're looking with Leicester early on. Uh,
Yeah, I agree. I've had Mavididi in since the start. Um, yeah, I'm gonna have to start with him now because he's been in there since the game launched. So I can't change that. So yeah, just who else am I adding with him? I think.
yeah, I think that's the thing, and I think people, as you mentioned, are going to increasingly want these guys, particularly with playing Sheffield Wednesday in game week 1, and the early run does look good. Um, so it's about how you get that coverage into your team, really. Um, I think that's all of them. We've rushed through to a degree, not intentionally. I just think, as we've started going through this, there's less to sort of say about some of these guys. It's sort of clear who people are looking at, I think. If there's any sort of questions you have off the back of this, either, we'll do our best to answer any of them. As I've done with the first uh, pod, I will also tag all the people that have given us information, not just to acknowledge that we really appreciate them going out of their way to provide this information to us, but also as a potential port of call for you if you want to ask them any questions. Um, it was good to see there were a couple of things that came out of the first one from I think both Stuart in terms of the on Ipswich and Brett in terms of on Coventry. So there is the potential to ask those guys as well, and it's very much appreciated by us. These pods wouldn't work without the help of those people, so um, it's sort of it's massive for us. Um, that's sort of all 24 teams. Hopefully, it's sort of been helpful. Hopefully, it's completely scrambled your brains with the variety of options that there are um, before you then sort of consolidate them down into what your first draft will look at. Deadline is obviously on Friday night with the big kickoff of Birmingham versus Ipswich. Um, as I mentioned previously, at least to start the season, my intention is for the injury news to be back. I can't guarantee that it will last for the whole season. There's certain things that, you know, potentially could happen that mean that I have to sort of put it down for a bit. So, but we'll see how it goes on that front. But certainly, my intention is at the start of the season to be running that again. Um, Apart from that, I'm not sure if there's anything else we need to cover, Dan. Anything you can think of that we haven't sort of mentioned so far?
No, I think that's it, Angus. Yeah, these pods have been very helpful for me this year, especially for a few clubs that I've maybe not focused on as much. So, yeah, I'm going to have to completely redo my draft now. So, yeah, I'm sure it'll change a few times before the game week starts. So, yeah, just enjoy the season. I'm sure we'll be back for the after the game week one has finished.
Yeah, absolutely. So all that's left for me to say, other than obviously, if you have any questions off the back of this, do let us know. We'll do our best to answer them. Some of them we won't be able to answer, but uh, otherwise we will attempt to help. And all that's left for me to say otherwise is thank you for listening and goodbye.
Goodbye.